Hey, happy Monday, everybody. Thank you for joining us on the other side of addiction. I am Al Richards, and as always, I am here with my lovely assistant, Lori Warburton, the lady in red, first responder. How you doing today, Lori?
I'm doing great. How are you
You
doing?
look beautiful as ever.
Well,
always.
thank you.
I need to
nice.
start dressing up. I mean, I'm always underdressed when you walk in the
room. It's no big deal. I mean, you probably just went to the gym. I did that yesterday, or that's how I would have shown up here. I was in my gym clothes all day.
I actually left running around in my gym clothes this morning, hurrying around home and got a shower. But hey, anyway, guys, we got a great show today. We have a guest who is joining us from Florida, and I hope you already told me how to say your last name, so I hope I don't slaughter it, Glenn. But we have Glenn Schiraldi, right? Did I say it right?
Perfect. Yeah.
Right on. All right. Nice. I'm so proud of myself. So, Glenn, I mean, this guy has done some phenomenal things. He has served as stress management facility at the Pentagon. He's worked at the Pentagon.
That's really neat.
That is something else. He's also done the International Critical Incident Stress Foundation, which I'd like to know a little bit more about that, and the University of Maryland, where he received the Outstanding Teacher Award, which that has got to be one heck of an award. I bet you were pretty proud of that one. Yeah. Let's see, what else do we got? The award, in addition to other teaching and service awards, this is what really impresses me too. He has 14 books on stress-related topics, has translated into 17 different languages, and including the Adverse Childhood Experiences Recovery Workbook, the Resilience Workbook, the Post-Traumatic Stress Disorder Source Book, and the Self-Esteem Workbook. I like that one too, because a lot of people suffer from self-esteem. My wife was one as well. And the founder of Resilience Training International. He's also trained as a layperson and clinician. I don't know why I can't say this word. Clinicians, did I say it right that time?
Yeah, there you go.
Around the world for various aspects of stress, trauma, and resilience. So Glenn, thank you so much for being on the show today.
It's really a pleasure to be with you. I'm glad we get this time together.
Yeah.
Me too.
Very, very grateful to have you. And I don't even remember, to be honest with you. I have been reaching out to so many people. How is it that you and I even got into contact? Because there was a middle person that introduced us, right?
Yeah, it was Paul Freiereisen.
Paul, that's right, from the IM Foundation.
Right.
Yeah, that is right. And he's a phenomenal guy too. Paul is a great guy. Yeah. So tell us a little bit more about yourself there, Glenn. I mean, I'm guessing I just scratched the surface.
Sure. So my career in the last 40 plus years has been focused on stress, resilience, and trauma. Mainly I was at the university, and then I got invited while I was there to also teach at the Pentagon. And then this International Critical Incident Stress Foundation deals with firefighters, cops, military, the mental health people who service them, and then, families, anybody else who's affected by their stress and trauma. I guess I'll just go back and kind of explain how I got into this anyway in the first place. I grew up in a little town in New York on Long Island. We had about 120 in my graduating class. And whenever we go back to reunions, we walk through the halls of that school and people say, we all felt so safe and secure here, because that was back in the 60s when I didn't know anybody who really had a drinking problem or a drug problem. I had great friends. We double dated and played sports together, great community, great extended family. And I always said that I think my experience in life was perfect for what I ended up doing, because there was enough family dysfunction that I could relate to anybody and never be surprised with what I came across, but not so much that I became dysfunctional totally myself. So So after West Point, I was in the military. That was during Vietnam era. And a lot of my friends were coming back with problems, and I didn't know really how to help them. And after my active duty, that was 5 years, I went into high school teaching, and you see everything. This was in the 70s, and I saw people on drugs and suicidal and being raped and so forth. Again, had no real idea how to help. So I decided to go back to school for my doctorate at the University of Maryland, and they had a wonderful stress management program. And it was basically from the neck down. It was biomedical. Stress was conceived as a physical reaction to demands that you didn't know how to deal with very well. And so you tamp that down by relaxation. Well, that's cool, but it doesn't really help for the deep stuff, the deep trauma, the childhood trauma, war trauma, rape, and so on. So as time went on, I started integrating the mental health side of stress management. And so I remember as a grad student there, I went on a speaking engagement. Basically, I was just along to watch, and one of my friends was given a talk on stress and the physiology and fight or flight and all that stuff. And someone raised their hand and said, well, can you get depressed if you're stressed? And so he looked at me like, I don't really know the answer. And I said, well, sure. But I didn't have anything to base that on except experience. So I wrote a book on depression. And a little while later, I wrote a book on stress and anxiety. And a little while later, on self-esteem. That was the one I call my truck book. If I get hit by a truck, it's kind of the first one I felt like this is what I came here to do, because I studied self-esteem under the foremost researcher in the country at the time, Morris Rosenberg. And he spent his career documenting how low self-esteem predicts all sorts of problems, psychological, physical, social problems. And so finally, toward the end of one semester, I said, well, Dr. Rosenberg, you study this all your life. What do you do if somebody doesn't have it? And what he said was, I don't know, basically.
Really?
And I found that really disappointing. And so I decided I was going to create a course that was 60% of it was self-esteem enhancement. So I kind of created a model based on what I'd read and came up with 20 skills to teach. And that course was the forerunner of the resilience training that I developed later. I guess I'll back up a little bit more and say I came across a meta-analysis which combined like 100 studies and found that any combination of anxiety, depression, and anger predicted diseases from headache to heart disease. And I thought, why not teach people when they're in their formative years in college how to prevent and cope with the things that lead to depression and anxiety and so forth. And so I did that, not knowing if it was even possible. But what we found is everything we tested changed in the predicted direction. People got less symptoms of depression, anxiety, anger, self-esteem went up. And that was really good news, because I didn't know at that point until we collected data if you could do that. So then some years go by and 9/11 hits our campus. And 2 weeks after 9/11 hit, a tornado swept through campus, killed several people. And I just looked at these kids coming to class and they were shell-shocked. And so I decided I needed to buttress the coping course that I just told you about. And I added stuff from resilience research and trauma research and all the stuff we used at the Pentagon that seemed to work the best, and created a resilience course. And again, not knowing if you could actually teach people to be more resilient, but we measured 8 different variables and they all changed the way we'd hope. Resilience increased, happiness, self-esteem, optimism, curiosity, while the bad stuff went down: anger, depression, and anxiety. And so that was kind of the substrate for the 2-day resilience training course that I give to the veterans, the cops, the military. and the people who were hoping to treat them without necessarily having a good background from graduate school on helping people treat trauma and build resilience. And then along the way, I wrote some more books, and it was kind of love-hate with writing because you isolate for months to get a book done. But then when someone says, that book on PTSD or that book on adverse childhood experiences really saved my life, and you take a breath and you go, okay, it was worth it. So
yeah,
absolutely.
So that's probably more than you wanted to know, but that's kind of how I got to read.
No, that's great information.
Yeah. Do you have any questions yet?
Not quite yet. I find it interesting. So my son's a highway patrol. And I know he goes through a lot, especially he also had his best friend who was on the same shift as him. He was just a couple more miles out than my son was. And he got called to this. It was an incident where a power line had gone down and there was a big semi truck, and somebody had to go in direct traffic and do all of this. And a young girl came around the corner and full speed ahead and ran his best friend over. My son was almost in the same spot.
Wow.
So I know he went through a lot over that because he ended up passing away, not right away, but it was evident. I mean, he never came out of it. And I was staying with him at the time, and him and his wife went through quite a bit over that, because Jack's saying, why wasn't it me? Why was it you? So I find it interesting that you do that, and so many connections that people go through, and I just, would love to pass this information on to him as well, so he could take a look at that. And
yeah, and someday before I finish, I would love to see cops and military and firefighters. It's a very interesting group. They function well operationally, but often bottle up because a lot of them grew up where you didn't feel emotions, and I'm not sure whether that causes people to be drawn to that kind of work, but they're a great, amazing, strong group. They're also a vulnerable group. Even the Navy SEALs, a lot of them will function beautifully on the battlefield, but when they get home, not always so as well. And so there's a lot of skills to learn other than just the operational skills.
There's been times when he's come home, I thought he was going to come home at a certain time, and then like 5 or 6 hours later, he shows up. And I'm thinking, how does his wife do this? Because I'm the mom and I'm going crazy. But I'd go out to his car and he'd be out there with tears coming down his cheeks because of either something he went through or something he was reading from that someone sent him, either thanking him or his experience with his partner. Like I said, it was like the 3 amigos, and then it went to the 2 amigos. But yeah. So I have seen that myself, and I didn't realize, you think it's just writing tickets or drinking coffee and donuts and all that kind of stuff, but it's become to be so much more. And when they come home and they're so quiet, you wonder why are they so quiet? But, they're kind of replaying everything in their minds as well of the day. And anywhere they go, they're kind of navigating and scoping out everything because that's how they're trained to do. And I just learned that as a mom, I can't call him in the middle of the day when he's working all the time and present him with a problem or something. And I learned that through reading a lot about it so that I would know how to be a better mother to him rather than being a problem or needing, being too needy or something like that, or checking in on him all the time. So yeah.
One thing that I find really interesting, Glenn. So yes, our first responders, but when you were even saying Navy SEALs, so when they're on the field and that they're focused, so their self-esteem has to be extremely high, you would think, right? I mean, when they're doing their job, but it's almost like they lose that self-esteem when they're away from that. Am I thinking that right? Or
yeah, well, I think there's a little difference between self-confidence,
okay,
which I felt the military did a great job of teaching me, but that's different from self-esteem, which is
Okay.
kind of a secure, inner, quietly glad feeling. And so one doesn't necessarily go along with the other, although they often do, but not necessarily. And the other thing is, Laura, you're talking, we often focus on the recent stress, be it combat or policing or rape, and we often overlook the childhood trauma that renders one vulnerable for the development of PTSD. And that troubles me a little bit because, we're starting to do a better job of helping our soldiers, for example, to recover from combat stress. But if you don't resolve those childhood memories that are still troubling and disturbing, and there's higher number of those in these kind of groups, combat people and the firefighters and cops, then they're likely to get triggered. And so that's why I felt so excited about this last book, which I'd been putting off. And finally, after 23 years of research, I decided, okay, I got to write this so that people know what to do with that early childhood trauma.
I love when you bring that up because I keep on saying that on the show. Unless you can deal with that, the seed of, what causes things, because for me, I went through a lot of childhood trauma in the beginning from the time I was 5. And it kind of carried on throughout my life because of decisions I made. But with the PTSD, I used to have it more than I do now, but there were things that brought that up, along the way.
Mm-hmm.
But as I've learned to deal with it and understand it more and remember my life and understand it and realize, the things that happened and everything like that, then shoving it back in my brain and not wanting to talk about it or remember anything. So I understand what you're saying with all of that because it did affect me
Yeah. One
growing
of the
up.
most rewarding projects I've ever done was interviewing 41 World War II combat survivors. And what I found was those who were able to kind of talk about it openly were the ones who seemed to fare the best when they got back. It's when we bottle it up.
Mm-hmm.
And most therapists, I'm going to generalize, it's not always true, but most therapists are still being trained. Okay, you're in pain, talk to me about it. What are you feeling? That works for a lot of things. It doesn't work very well for the deep childhood traumas that are stored not in the left verbal logical brain, but more in the right brain with its deep connection to the emotional and survival part of the brain. So talking is not usually the most effective starting point, but it's where what a lot of people get when they go to see a therapist, which is too bad because I don't think we're doing a great job of training our people in treating trauma.
Yeah, and I think with you saying that, Glenn, so my wife, when she was going through her battle with alcoholism, she was in and out of rehabs. And sometimes I would talk to some of these therapists, and of course, with a lot of people that battle addiction, I mean, there are some that commit crimes to feed their addiction, but there's others, maybe they break a law like a DUI or driving on a suspended license and that, but there's that punishment. But I remember telling one of her therapists that somebody needs to get inside my wife's head and figure out what happened in her life that is bringing all this pain, that's surfacing all this stuff for her to self-medicate. And the majority of the rehabs that she went in, it was always kind of like what you were saying with therapists. It was always the same program almost every single time. Now, she did go to a couple where they finally got that she was probably sexually abused when she was a young child. She had pushed that way back in her brain, but yet it was still kind of surfacing.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know, maybe I'm wrong, but I think if they did these things in like rehabs for addicts, I think that would help them. And Mallory brought it up in a couple of weeks ago in the show. when she first met Chuck, and after she screwed up the first time when she was with Chuck. And Chuck asked her, what is it going to take for you to realize your life is worth it? And she said, I want to be inspired into recovery, not punished in recovery. And once she realized that and Chuck realized it, it started changing her life around. And I really think a lot of that needs to be done in the rehabs. I mean, I don't know how you guys feel about it, but I really do believe that they need to dig deep. Yes, okay, teach the AA, the 12-step program, because that's worked for a long, long time, many years, and it's helped thousands and thousands of people. But does it really dig deep enough to bring those childhood trauma or emotions or whatever? There's something that's in there that's caused you to switch to the other side, correct?
Well, I think you're spot on. I think, just like now we're saying, don't just treat PTSD, but treat the addiction with it. But part of treating both of those are getting to the root of what's driving either or both.
Mm-hmm.
And I was just thinking about a young woman that I got to know at the university. If you looked at her, a lot like Mallory, beautiful, likable. She was an aerobics instructor, extremely fit, attractive. And maybe 3/4 of the way through the semester, she shared that she'd been in probably the most recognized eating disorders program in the country, who treated her behavior, her eating, period. Everything was about, we'll reward you if you eat, and if you don't eat, then we take away some of your privilege. And I'm going, you mean to tell me they never dealt with the things that you went through? An abusive father who abandoned her, the kids who teased her for being precociously developed and she thought she was fat. And so I was thinking about this. It doesn't matter whether it's eating addiction or a sex addiction or a gambling addiction. You see these common themes that I think Mallory so beautifully articulated. I must not be good enough if dad left.
Mm-hmm.
I couldn't help my mother's addiction, so maybe I'm inadequate. But you see these same themes, and they're all themes around the shame that we're talking about, which gets imprinted. And I think this is so critical. The shame gets imprinted to a great degree in the first 2 or 3 years of life. And who talks about that? We talk about, well, you did this crime and therefore you're ashamed, so don't do that anymore. But we've all known people that are attractive, likable, accomplished, and yet they don't like themselves. They might self-loathe, they may hate themselves. That's this thing called shame, and it gets imprinted often in the first weeks and months of life. Now, just to go a little bit into the theory, the brain goes under this incredible explosion of development from the last trimester to year 3. During that time, the logical verbal left brain isn't fully developed. And so you don't store memories in the left brain where you can consciously recall and talk about them. You store them deeply on the right side of the brain, which oversees emotions and survival tendencies, like maybe I shut down when I'm under stress, or maybe I get real aggressive. And that stuff is usually operating below the level of conscious awareness. And so you can't talk somebody out of something that hasn't been reasoned into. So for example, a 2-year-old, the right brain is mostly formed by that point. The left brain is not. And so the right brain is dominant in those first 3 years and thereafter for emotional events. If a mother, say, and I'm only using mother because they tend to be the primary caregiver, especially at the beginning, but it could be a father or a caregiver. If that caregiver, let's say they don't want the child for whatever reason, or they're preoccupied because hubby is cheating or they're financially deprived, if that caregiver doesn't even say anything that's understood, but the child understands in the first few months of life tone and facial expressions.
Mm-hmm.
If you internalize that as shame, later you can maybe put words to that. I didn't feel valuable, I didn't feel worthy, but it's more experienced as a felt sense. And so the old psychology that says, let's talk to the left brain about it, let's get rid of these distortions, that's okay, it doesn't hurt, but it doesn't get to the visceral experience of shame, which is experienced as kind of a sense of dread, or maybe a tight gut, or heart racing, anxiety. I mean, there's a million ways that shame manifests, but the root of it is what's stored in the right emotional survival brain. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
Mhm.
that's
Yep,
very
absolutely.
interesting. I had no clue on that.
But it explains so much, doesn't it?
Yeah,
Why would an intelligent person go over to drugs? Well, because they're covering pain that nobody knows how to fix.
yeah. And I mean, yeah, themselves, they don't even know how to fix.
Exactly.
Wow,
And that runs
that's
deep.
interesting. Gosh, I mean, none of us have been taught how to be a parent, right? We just kind of take things from our parents, and then it keeps going. There's things we take and things we don't. Can you imagine though if we understood that stuff? So when we have our first child, we know how to communicate with them better, even though they may, not understand everything. But wouldn't that be? I think that would change things, wouldn't you? I mean, wouldn't that be a game changer?
I do. And for example, there are parenting classes which teach great skills, and those are terrific. But I say, let's first heal that parent, so that they can be 100% there for their child. Because a good parent doesn't necessarily need parenting classes to know that you got to be fully present with a child, show affection, show interest. That comes fairly naturally, I think, once people are healed. But if they're still carrying trauma from their early years, that gets transmitted. And it's not just behaviorally, it gets transmitted at the genetic level, the epigenome, the telomeres. So there's a lot going on, and it isn't enough to just say, well, don't be stressed or be a good parent. Let's talk about how you heal that deep emotional pain. And then you got a fighting chance to, to be the kind of parent that the child needs.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Man,
that makes sense.
This is some interesting stuff. Matt,
It is.
I'm so glad you're here with us today, because I'm learning stuff, and I'm sure Lori, we're both looking at each other,
Yeah.
kind of shaking our heads like, oh my gosh. So
Yeah.
we're going to take a quick break right now. When we come back, we can either start right there and move on to the next thing. But guys, stick around, because Glenn is sharing some really, really good information.
Amazing.
Yeah. Is there something you want to share, Glenn, before we go?
Maybe after the break, we can talk about the adverse childhood experiences research.
Oh, I love it.
What we know about it, and then maybe how to fix it.
Okay.
Amazing.
Love
Okay.
Guys, stay tuned. We'll be right back.
How do you start your morning? Start it with a cup of High Point coffee. Because no matter where you go or what you do, it's always better with coffee. High Point coffee. What's your high point? Located on the corner of 7800 South and Redwood Road in West Jordan. And a special thanks goes out to our partners in Oxford, Mississippi.
This is Gregory, owner of Lift Up Concrete, proudly serving the Wasatch Front for the last 12 years, lifting sunken flatwork for both residential and commercial applications. Only fully trained professionals lifting concrete at your residence with the same quality of material and method used at every commercial job we ever do. Don't replace it, lift it. liftupconcrete.net, 801-792-4535. Contact us at liftupconcrete.net, or if you're looking for a complimentary quote, 801-792-4535. Again, 801-792-4535. Again, this is Gregory, Lift Up Concrete Lifting.
Hello, my friends. This is Brad Neufeld, and I want to thank you for tuning in to the Resilience Talk Network. You can listen to my show, Resilience, every morning, Monday through Friday at 8 a.m. Mountain Standard Time. On my show, we will be discussing what it takes for you to overcome the day-to-day challenges that all of us face in life, as well as some of the devastating ones that may lead us to feelings of hopelessness and despair. It's my goal to provide you with the tools and skills that you need to overcome anything that is thrown your way. To find out more about my show, visit our website at www.resiliencetalk.com. That's www.resiliencetalk.com. And as always, until we meet again, go for everything that you want in life and make it happen.
Hey, welcome back, everybody, to the other side of addiction. Yeah, Al Richards here, and my lovely co-host, Lori Warburton. So I want to thank our sponsors. See, I just come back and I almost forgot our sponsors. Hey, we want to give a big shout out to High Point Coffee in West Jordan on the corner of 7800 South and Redwood Road. These guys are awesome. You'll hear me say it all the time. Matter of fact, I was just in there this morning and walked up to the counter, and Jana saw me and says, "Hi, Al, how are you doing?" I'm like, "Hi, Jana." Of course, one of the girls there was new, so she didn't know what I wanted. But if Jana was at the counter, she probably would have already started making my chai. So, and we also want to thank Lift Up Concrete out of Kaysville. These guys are incredible. So if you have sunken or settled concrete, give Gregory Carlisle a call at Lift Up Concrete. Lori, you always have something to say on that one.
If your concrete needs a facelift, you know right where to go.
You know right where to go. Yeah.
I've heard great things about them as well. So,
and they actually inject you just like they do with facelifts, right?
Yeah, there you go.
All right. Hey, and we want to say another huge thank you to our guest, Glenn. I mean, this first half of the show, phenomenal information. I mean, during the break, we were all chatting, bringing up some more stuff, and we should have been recording because some of that stuff was really good. So before we went on break, you mentioned that we should come back and talk about adverse childhood experiences. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay.
I think it gets better, really. So back in 1998, two medical doctors, Vincent Felitti, who was in charge of preventive medicine at Kaiser Permanente in San Diego, teamed up with Dr. Robert Anda, who worked for Center for Disease Control. And they showed that in 17,000 people, these were white, educated, middle class, employed with health insurance. So it's not high-risk group. But of those 17,000, 2/3 of them had at least one adverse childhood experience, defined as one of 10 things: any kind of abuse, physical, mental, emotional, or sexual, emotional or physical neglect, and then living in a home where a biological parent was absent, typically by divorce or separation, domestic violence to the female caregiver, someone who is incarcerated, a drug addict, or mentally ill or suicidal. Now note here, those are only the 10 most common adverse childhood experience. There are tons of others. For example, you could lose a parent from gang crime, deployment, but just looking at those 10, they found that adverse childhood experiences predicted just about any disorder you can think of, psychological disorders like depression, anxiety, PTSD, ADHD, and then just about any medical disorder you can think of. Alzheimer's disease, heart disease, cancer, autoimmune problems, diabetes, fibromyalgia. I mean, the list just goes on and on.
Holy cow.
Not to mention functional problems like marital problems, learning disorders. So this was done in 1998, and numerous studies since then have confirmed the finding. The more of these ACEs you have, adverse childhood experience, the more likely you are to get some kind of stress-related disorder. And typically, most of the things, if you have 4 ACEs, then your risk of having a problem goes up 2 to 5 times. For some things like suicide, it's like 30 times higher. Drug addiction, it's like 5 times higher or more. So anyway, that's what we've known for 23 years. So ACEs are bad and predicts bad stuff. Well, so what? What can you do about that? So the question is, how come? Why do these ACEs create havoc in adults? We're talking, these are all adult problems, not just child problems. And the core of the link between ACEs and stress-related symptoms is dysregulated stress. Now, this is going to be a little long-winded, so please jump in if I'm not making sense here. There's a window of tolerance where stress is neither too high nor too low. As long as we're in that level of stress arousal, the left brain is online. We can think, we can talk. So I can give you support, I can ask for support. If you're an offender, I maybe can negotiate with you and try to talk you down. That's the way we're wired to function brain-wise, as long as we're in that, what I call the resilience zone, not too high, not too low stress arousal. 70% of the time for toxic stress, including ACEs, stress arousal gets stuck on too high. And there you see a lot of typical symptoms of PTSD, anxiety, where you can't concentrate, you're agitated, you can't sleep, you got too much cortisol being secreted, one of the stress hormones. And then 30% of the time, people get stuck on hypoarousal, too low arousal. And that looks like someone's collapsed and frozen, no energy, they can't move. And that usually happens because either someone has been on hyperarousal so long that they get exhausted, or they were overwhelmed by intense stress. Think of a rape victim who was held down, couldn't move, and expend stress energy. And you're so overwhelmed, all you can do is play dead. And it's not playing at all. It's a survival technique the brain pulls up, because sometimes the perpetrator will stop. And so a lot of memories that are traumatic get stuck in conditions of hyper and or hypoarousal. And so they're not, in both cases, the left brain is offline. And so it's the right brain storing these memories, not the left brain that you can talk to and think through with and verbalize. It's stuck in the right brain as images, as visceral responses, as emotions, and as action tendencies, the tendency to run away, the tendency to fight. Some people get real angry when they've been traumatized. Some people get frozen. But I think what's interesting is just to normalize that when you're overstressed and stuck on too high or too low, it's a normal biological response. It's not because people are weak character-wise, they're not innately weak. It's just what the body does under intense, chronic, what's called toxic stress.
So have you heard of the stress-induced asthma being one of those
Yes.
that happen?
And
I
addictions. Yeah. If I
and
haven't made that
addictions.
clear. Yeah.
Yeah,
Hmm.
as
But
well.
just like I said, just about any stress-related condition, medical or psychological, has been predicted by ACEs. Not to say that is the sole cause, but it is a risk factor, a big risk factor, an independent risk factor.
Hmm.
So when you understand that it's not stuck in the logical left brain, it's stuck in the right brain. And a lot of these memories are not consciously recalled where you're able to verbalize it. That's what the left brain does. It's stuck in memories that are operating below conscious awareness. So somebody may walk around anxious, a feeling of dread, a feeling of low self-esteem. These experiences when a child is really young, they have no idea how to make sense of it because their left brain isn't fully functional. It's not what we say is online. So you just internalize the sense of strong emotions, negative emotions, a felt sense that something is wrong with me. I think Mallory's case was a great example. What did I do that I can't control my mother's addiction, or why did dad leave? So it's not a real logical thing. It's more like a felt sense. Only maybe years later do you put words to that. How are we doing? Tracking so far?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. This is really good stuff.
Mhm.
I mean, very educational.
So just trying to think what else we need to know to make sense of the so what? What do you do to fix it?
Well, I kind of have a question while we're on
Sure.
this subject. So for me, I know that years later, like for instance, after my mother had passed away, which has been 12 years ago. So sometimes, and it's not very often, but every now and again, all of a sudden I'll wake up and and not just about that, it could be about something else, but I'll just be really like emotional and I don't know why. And then I have this feeling in my gut, that something's wrong. And then it continues throughout the day. And then by 12 o'clock at night, I'm sobbing or whatever. This has happened a couple of times. But then when I go back to see why is this happening, right? And I go there and look back, it's something that happened to me a long time ago on that day or that particular time frame.
Mm-hmm.
Is that something that you're talking about?
Yeah.
That, the left and the right brain.
Yeah.
So I'm not remembering, but it comes out when it wants to.
And that's precisely what happens. The left brain isn't consciously recalling, but it's all stored in the right brain with its connection to the lower brain levels and the body. So anything that triggers, you can just feel stressed about whatever, a trivial thing today.
Yeah.
But that stress triggers any stress that's not resolved and settled. It may be a memory 20 years ago that you don't consciously recall.
Mm-hmm.
So
it just goes on a deeper level. And that's what I could feel. It's only happened to me a few times.
right.
But when it
but
did,
you're feeling it here mostly. It's not something where you're thinking about it. You're feeling it emotionally.
Yeah, emotionally, and like, why am I feeling this way? And I can't quite put my finger on it, and then when I go back in time, I'm like, oh my gosh, this happened or that happened, and that's why. But my body remembers that trauma.
So that's step one, is just acknowledging, and then eventually we want to learn how to process that memory so it stops running your show in adulthood.
Yeah.
So what we know is ACEs lead to dysregulated stress, stuck on too high or too low, and that does an amazing amount of things. It changes the child's developing brain. It changes their body's development. It sets the brain to be highly alert, over alert. And so it's set up brain changes that are similar to what we see in PTSD and anxiety patients. Cortisol is a big player. It's one of the stress hormones that not only changes brain development and physical development, but it creates disease states like diabetes because it converts protein to sugar. It affects the immune system so that the immune system often gets overactive or sometimes underactive. It's just a whole cascade of things that people never put together because they don't fully remember those
Yeah.
childhood memories. But those childhood memories are still working behind the scenes.
It's
And
I mean, go
even
ahead,
we're
Glenn.
learning prenatally, like if the mother is stressed during the third trimester, she can pass on what's called epigenetic changes to the child. Like only about 5% of diseases are purely genetically passed on. But next to the DNA strand is this thing called an epigenome. You're stuck with your genes, but you're not stuck with your epigenome. The epigenome is influenced by stress. If the mother is stressed or the father is stressed, they can pass on epigenetic changes that are passed on through the sperm and the egg to the child while a child is an embryo. The mother's stress hormones can pass through the amniotic fluid and influence epigenomes. And then after birth, all the stress around that child, if the mother is stressed, there's violence in the home, that all influences the epigenome and therefore determines how the brain develops to be kept on high alert. So there's a zillion ways that can happen. A difficult surgery, like I had someone call me once and she said, I'm moving, my brother was murdered and I want to get this treated before I have to move. Where can I do this really fast? So I suggested a place, and I talked to her after she got back and she said, we treated the murder and that did away with the PTSD, but they uncovered a surgery that I had when I was 3 years old. Up until 1987, they didn't anesthetize children when they were getting operated on, thinking they don't feel pain. They feel pain. And so she said, once we processed that trauma, my low-grade depression I'd had all my life went away. So it's pretty clear that unresolved early childhood trauma plays out in adulthood unless those memories are acknowledged, expressed, understood, and healed.
So I have a really good question here for you. I'm a person that is really against the pharmaceutical companies. I think these guys are just throwing out any kind of synthetic drug they can possibly think of to treat whatever. I mean, it seems like every week on TV you hear of something new that they've got a new drug for. What you're talking about, and from what I'm hearing, and I think I'm hearing this right, a lot of this stuff can be treated without drugs, right? It's just talking, and not like a therapist, just talk about it, but digging deep. I mean, it can be done without giving somebody, here's a prescription, go to your pharmacy and pick this up, you'll feel much better, right? Because that's just putting a Band-Aid on the issue. It's not bringing it out.
Yeah, I like what my mentor said, that I've never seen a pill that cures PTSD. And I would add, or anxiety. I'm not saying don't ever use it, because some people get their lives back with medicine. But my view is there's so many other tools that don't carry the risk of addiction and other side effects. Try those, give them a fair trial, because usually they work. If you get a therapist who knows a full range of tools, not just one, not just talking. There are a lot of great trauma treatments that have been developed in recent years that are really quite good.
Okay. And there's a lot of times the person who's battling don't even know, correct? So 1 year, gosh, this was probably, I would think about 3 years ago, my wife was in a rehab and she had a therapist or a psychologist that was working with her. And one day this person wanted to speak with me. And so I went in the room, spoke with her, just one-on-one. My wife was out of the room. After about 45 minutes, my wife came back in the room, and this lady was asking me a lot of questions. And the emotions I was going through, I just thought it was the stuff that I was dealing with at home, because it's like I was coming home to a flipping war zone most of the days. She diagnosed me with a small portion of PTSD. And I basically look at her and I'm like, yeah, you're freaking nuts. Yeah, I mean, because I just thought basically it was like our first responders and people who have been in the military.
Mm-hmm.
And then when she was explaining to me the reason why, I would have never ever thought that I had a small form. And my heart goes out to those people who have, I got goosebumps, who have the big form, because my small form, man, it was messing me up. I mean, my emotions were everywhere. And I had no clue why.
One of the things we talk about in my resilience training is that when people are stressed, they manifest differently. One person maybe gets PTSD, maybe another is depressed, another is anxious, or more typically they overlap and you get dual things going on. I almost said dual diagnosis, but I don't like to label someone. But when someone says PTSD, we generally know what they're talking about. But it's not a terminal diagnosis. It's just a condition that can be remedied to a great degree. So that's kind of oh yeah, we haven't even talked about attachment disorder. So let me talk about that first.
All right, let's hit it.
What a child needs to develop the brain so that it's calm and able to control emotions, immunity, and all the stuff that a healthy adult can later do. A child needs to connect with an adult who is loving and responsible. That child knows, and the child will often respond to in utero stimuli, where they know that the mother is calm, things outside, because the child can hear whether there's peace out there and calm. But a child needs to be securely attached, meaning they feel loved, they feel like they matter. And the caregiver shows that through touching and through loving gazes, the tone of your voice, not so much the words, but the child picks up, they can tell whether someone's calm or confident. They can see images of the way that person moves, if they're graceful and rhythmic. And so the child who knows that mom goes away, but she comes back, therefore I can trust mom or dad, that child grows up securely attached, and that favors proper brain development. And what happens when you get insecure attachment? When the mother is preoccupied or angry or doesn't want the child, it isn't so much the words, it might be an angry expression that a 2-month-old can pick up on and internalize. And I say that only insofar as to indicate that if we know what a loving, bonding parent does, that tells you a lot about how a child who didn't get that kind of parenting heals. You have to simulate those attachment bonds. And you can do that as an adult, but not through talking. Not by just giving insights. Freud could tell you that, but it rarely cured people. But to create things that simulate that loving experience. And so I think we're kind of ready to talk about, so what? What do you do knowing all this stuff, right?
Yeah, because I was going to, hit you up on the healing part. So, yeah.
Yeah, because all this stuff is nice, but if we haven't got some kind of strategies.
Yeah.
So a comprehensive plan for healing. And let me just say, there are some trauma treatments that do an amazing job in a few sessions. But a lot of people who are affected don't want to go or will not go to therapy. maybe they've gone to a therapist in the past and they said, this is bogus. This guy didn't know anything about treating trauma. Or maybe they're afraid of stigma, and that's a real concern. Or maybe they can't afford it. Maybe they don't know what'll help. But the healing ingredients are an atmosphere of love, because that's what attachment is. Calm and safety, because that's also what attachment is. And by the way, an attachment figure who's effective imparts joy, like I enjoy being with you, as opposed to, say, someone who didn't want that child, and the child can pick up on that pretty easily. We talked about you need to acknowledge the source of the pain, understand it, express it. As Edith Eger said, the Holocaust survivor, expression is the opposite of depression, and we need to take responsibility for healing as opposed to avoiding. And then the other element I put in is just, we need to give ourselves credit for doing as well as we have so far. Like you were saying, Laura, you were a survivor. That's a tremendous strength. I think Mallory talked about being kind of defiant, and that was a strength, and often our strengths can end up being a weakness as well, but that's part of the learning process. But the strength part is something to be recognized. So let me just kind of talk about the comprehensive plan that often works. We're going to kind of prepare the brain to be rewired in regard to the early trauma memories so that they don't bother us quite as much. Then we go to the root memory and rewire that. And then we talk about transition skills, because life is more than just healing from the past. It's moving to a satisfying life, okay? So step one is regulate arousal. Learn how to get it back into the resilience zone, and there are different ways that we do that. Step two is regulate emotions. There's some very powerful ways, so that if someone is emotionally kind of out of control, we can get that emotions back into a reasonable level so it doesn't enhance the stress arousal. There's different steps for brain care, because a healthy functioning brain is more able to rewire itself when presented with positive neural pathways. So all of that is kind of preparing the brain for adaptive neural pathways. Then imagery helps to strengthen and stabilize the brain. Now, notice nothing that I've said so far is yet talking about reworking the memory. But I kind of liken this to, let's say you have a neural pathway related to a real disturbing memory, and there's a lot of people walking along that path, and every time they walk that path, it reinforces that path. What if you build a new road alongside it? And the more you use that road, the more people tend to go to that road and not use the negative neural pathway. So that's what creating positive images does. Then we're ready to start to rewire the original memory, whether it's abuse or dad leaving or whatever. What's called float back strategies. And then we rework the shame that is often embedded in those old memories. And then once somebody's done that, think what they know now. They know how to calm themselves in everyday circumstances. They also know how to calm themselves and regulate stress for old memories. And once that's kind of all laid in to the rewiring of the brain, then we can start to learn skills about having joy and feeding the soul, creating a new future. And so that's kind of the program that I've laid out. It's pretty comprehensive, but quite effective. especially when someone doesn't have the resources or the willingness to find a good trauma therapist.
So you're almost getting people to start even paying attention to their thoughts as well, right? To what they are recognizing what they're thinking to kind of help start them on that path. Is that
Well,
correct? Or
okay, so cognitive therapy is dealing with thoughts in the present. That's good for present stress. I had
okay,
an argument with my boss, and it's good. It hardly ever hurts, but it may not go deep enough. So I'm talking really not so much about thoughts, but for example, the float back strategies. Let's assume you've done all that stuff to kind of prepare your brain. You know how to regulate your stress, your emotions. Your brain is healthy now because you've taken care of it. You've done all this imagery work, where you think about maybe the day you were born and the day you were in a nursery, and you experienced someone who comforted you and let you know you're going to be okay, that someone's never going to leave you. Then you're ready to start the float back strategies. The float back generally goes like something like this. Something stressed me out today. The boss criticized me. The first float back strategy says, learn how to calm that event. And then once you've calmed and soothed that event, you say, okay, let me remember as early as I can to an event that triggered a similar negative response. And then you learn how to soothe and settle that. Then there's another variant of that says, let me take a shame-related thought, like, I'm no good. Okay, think of that one, but not so much try to reason yourself out of it, but where in my body do I feel that? Maybe I feel it in my gut or my throat or my heart. Soothe that through what's called body-based or body-centered trauma skills. And the theory being, once you can calm your body, it calms the survival brain, then the emotional brain, and ultimately then the left brain can come back online. That makes sense, Al?
yeah, that's interesting.
It is, but
Yeah.
it's not so much thinking. I mean, as you recover, thinking becomes more prominent in the healing process, but not
Okay.
at first, because a lot of smart people are, still traumatized, and thinking hasn't helped them.
Yeah.
I remember an exercise I did once when I was in treatment, and they had asked me to write a letter as if I were standing in the person that I feel hurt about the most, in their shoes, about my alcoholism. And so what I heard was, maybe I should ask my sons, because that's where I went with that, if they would write a letter about how they felt about me throughout the years. And I brought that back, and and it was from one son who was talking to me. He's always been there for me. The other son, we went 3 years or so without talking at all. And he said, no, you got it wrong. You need to put yourself in your other son's shoes, the one that you're not really wanting to face,
Yeah.
and talk about and write those feelings down. Boy, when I did that, I put myself in his shoes as a young boy, and what he might have gone through up until that point in my life. It was amazing, the things that came out and what I understood and what I was afraid to face about my own, self, and the way that I was as a mom sometimes. And when I did that exercise and I came back to the group, and you actually have to read it out loud to everyone, and that's how you become so close in these situations. I mean, it helped me a ton. But that other letter I asked from my son, I read it all the time, to help me, because that is also something that he was very sincere about. And I don't want to be that person ever again, right? But that exercise really helped my brain a lot because, like you said, sometimes you have to get to more close to that root or what those feelings actually are. And I was kind of taking the easy way out. Oh, well, maybe he'll be easier on me, so I'll get it from him, right? Rather than the other son. So once I did the exercise right, it was a huge key to my healing process. That's one of the things that really helped me out the most.
Yeah, it is.
Mhm.
In most of the recovery programs, that's an important step. You try to understand the damage we've caused and offer amends. I
Exactly.
usually put that toward the end of healing
Mhm.
because as valuable as that is, it hasn't yet gone back and said, what drove that addiction? What was the hurts from childhood that if you don't resolve or settle or soothe, they're still likely to rear its ugly head.
Mhm.
So I think, we start to go back, but I say start first with healing. Like in the forgiveness process, in the military, there's something, well, I'll tell you a little story here that I was doing a resilience course and this Navy veteran, if I ever ran into him in a dark alley in a ship, I'd probably run the other way. I mean, he was big and he was mean looking. And he said, I don't believe in God, but I have regrets. And what do I do with those regrets? Because they eat me up. And I told him about this skill that's been used in the veterans recovery called the kind moral authority. Have you heard about this? Um, where you just imagine being with someone who is kind, who has your back. They don't want you to suffer anymore. They want you to get better. And you feel comfortable in telling that person your pain and how you think what you did hurt others, which kind of is going where you're talking about, Lori. And that person doesn't judge because they want you to be happy and heal. They don't want to punish you. And that kind moral authority, be it God or Buddha or whoever it is, or somebody you imagine, it could be a grandmother. That person just feels affection for you and understanding. And you just kind of let that settle in your body, not so much up here because thinking doesn't often go deep enough. Then you transition to forgiving yourself. Then you transition to forgiving, say, a offending parent. And then you offer amends or apologies to anybody you've hurt. Now that's, I think, really powerful, but I think it's down the list in terms of sequence on how you
Oh,
heal. Because
absolutely.
if you try to heal prematurely without healing what's driving the behavior often repeats.
Mhm.
Wow.
I would have to agree with that. That's kind of how I worked my, the amends in the end, going to people. And, every now and again, I'll have something come up where I think, maybe I would need to make an amends, and then I do that. So, I mean, it's always in my mind, but that step in itself, although scary as it seems, and you have this list, it's interesting how when you actually do it and go to each individual or person, how some people don't even, what are you talking about? Like you've been carrying this around forever. You know what I mean?
Right.
And then it doesn't always go in the order you think. It presents itself at different times. And so it was just, my experience was kind of neat how that all worked out. And I was scared a few times, or I'd run into somebody that I didn't expect to be doing an amends to, or someone I used to work with. And I would face that, and I would walk up and have this conversation. And the more I did that, the more healthier I became and felt inside, and the more my heart was lifted up.
Sure. It's
So
wonderful. And I love the addiction recovery program because a lot of that happens in the program. If I were going to have an ideal world, I'd have a concurrent class where you teach skills to cope with pain and stress. Like, for example, I said that and I used to be reluctant to say this because it sounded flaky and unscientific, but love is what changes. Just like with Mallory, it was that loving father figure that turned her around. It wasn't
Yeah.
medicine, it wasn't coercion. Love changes. All that bad stuff that happens with cortisol, if you can cause oxytocin, which is called the calm and connect hormone, to be secreted with a loving experience, that counters just about all the bad stuff cortisol does. So, I mean, we now know there's a physiology to
I
love.
just got chills because out of all my life, I finally have that, but I've never experienced that at any given length
Right.
until the past 8 months of my life. So it's been,
Yeah.
I can
They
testify
say
to that for sure.
it's a gift. And they say you can't
gift.
love others until you love yourself. I don't think that's totally true. I think some people are lucky to find like you have and like Mallory did. But if you don't have such a person, then you learn how to love yourself, to be a good parent to yourself. And that's what I think
Absolutely.
is quite learnable. And there's different ways to do that. Fortunately, there are lots of nice ways to do that. Have you heard of the self-compassion approach to healing?
Mm-mm.
I don't think so.
Okay, so a lot of people who are in pain will do just what I did at West Point. I wanted to be, well, I loved the excellence of West Point. It just appealed to me as a young kid. But I think a part of me wanted to be so perfect that I would never get criticized. And that's a very common theme in people. It's part of mortality. We're not perfect. We'd love to be because nobody will criticize you. But, carried to extreme, it's a very uncomfortable place to be. And so if you're self-critical, that predicts bad outcomes. But if you can accept and deal with your imperfections in a loving way, that predicts good outcomes. It's much more motivating, love is, than fear. Lots of different studies show that. And so the self-compassion strategy says, okay, you're in pain today, you messed up, somebody yelled at you, you had an argument, now you feel like a heel. You just stop and say 4 things. First of all, you calm using the calming skills that the person has learned. You breathe. And then you just say, but not just say it in your left brain, but feel it in your body. This is a moment of suffering. Suffering is part of life, meaning everybody suffers, you're not alone. May I bring kindness to this moment? May I give myself the compassion I need? And compassion is just another word for love, loving kindness, gentle friendliness. So many of the skills that I use in the workbook go back to that. Just take a minute, breathe, notice where in your body you're upset, because that simple act changes the brain activity so that all parts of the brain get online when we track what's going on in our body. If you can feel love in your body, it favorably influences the brain. So, whether you're floating back to a childhood memory, you do it in love. Just imagine someone with a hand on your shoulder as you go back there. You don't have to do this alone. Love is very powerful.
And it could be any type of love, right, Glenn? I mean, just not love from another human being. I mean, it could be love from your pet, or it could be love what you're doing. Is that correct? I mean, it's any kind of form of love, or is it more the human type?
Well, the principle is when you dissociate a traumatic memory, meaning you wall it off and separate it from the rest of your memories, it's kind of stuck there and likely to rear its ugly head. So the principle of reconsolidation says if you can bring all aspects to a memory to awareness, which is tough because a lot of these memories are beneath conscious awareness, but if you can, the brain has a chance to change it. So if, for example, a rape survivor if I can tell you as a respectful, kind witness, then respect replaces shame, begins to replace shame. if I can learn how to tell you calmly, now calm replaces high arousal. And so love can come from a significant other. It can come from divinity. You can imagine a pet. Some people, didn't have good luck with people, but and I very rarely encounter that. But a pet can be an imaginary source of love, or it can come from yourself learning to be a good parent to yourself, even though you never had that. So there are lots of different ways, but I think the principle is when you bring up pain, you got to surround it with a loving embrace, figuratively. And there are different skills, different ways to do that.
Okay. Man, this is some great information again.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, Glenn is on point. I'm so glad we have you here on the show because both Lori and I, we're still looking at each other, just kind of like, this is amazing. This is some really good stuff. We're going to take another real quick break, and then we'll be right back. And then, Glenn, I'd like you to share with our audience if people need to get a hold of you, if they're able to do that, or where they can find your books. So stay tuned, and we'll be right back.
Hi, this is Tamara K. Anderson, and I want to share something special with you. When our son Nathan was diagnosed with autism, I felt like the life we had expected for him was ripped away, and with it, my own heart shattered as well. It's very common for families to feel anger, pain, confusion, and anxiety when a child is diagnosed. This is where my book, Normal for Me, comes into play. It shares my story of learning to replace my pain with acceptance, peace, joy, and hope. Normal for Me has helped change many lives, and I'd like to give this book to as many families as possible. We've put together something I think is really special. My friends and listeners can order copies of my book at a significantly discounted price, and we will send them to families who have just had a child diagnosed with autism or another special needs diagnosis. We will put your name inside the cover so they will know someone out there loves them and wants to help. I will also sign each copy. You can order as little as one or as many as hundreds to be shared with others. So go to my website, tamarakanderson.com, and visit the store section for more information and to place your order. You can bless the lives of many families by sending them hope, love, and peace. Check it out today at tamarakanderson.com and help me spread hope to the world.
Welcome to the Resilience Talk Network. My name is Jay Walter, and I'm the host of Rebuilding, heard every weekday night from 6 to 7 p.m. You can listen in and learn how to face your fears, overcome obstacles, and make dreams a reality. So listen every weekday night from 6 to 7 p.m. right here on the Resilience Talk Network.
Hey, welcome back, everybody, to the other side of addiction. And before we get started here, I want to thank a few more of our sponsors. We have ServPro, and basically ServPro West Jordan, Brad out there who owns the West Jordan one and St. George. But we want to thank all ServPros from Ogden all the way down to St. George. Thank you so much for your sponsorship. And we have a new one. We have I'm Power Real Estate. They just came in to help support us. They love what Lori and I are doing, and
Awesome.
Just helped us out to where Lori and I were looking at doing a new project. And because of their sponsorship, we're able to get this thing in the
Yay.
calendar and get it going. So you guys will be seeing something here coming up here shortly. And last but not least, and we definitely don't want to forget Brad and Resilience Talk Network.
That's right.
Thank you so much. None of this would be going on without our sponsors and without Resilience Talk Network. So thank you all. We greatly appreciate it. Laura
Very,
and I,
very grateful
yeah, grateful.
for all
And we
of them.
feel it
And
from the bottom of our hearts. So
it makes me want to cry.
I know.
Just-
well, it's
So, it
because
really
again, we
does.
couldn't be doing this without them.
Yeah.
So we are very blessed and very, very grateful for all of you. Thank you so much. All right. Glenn, this is your time, man. I mean, you have shared so much great information. It's easy to tell you have put so much effort into studying this stuff and getting to know the things that you know. And I mean, I just wish there was a way that we could jump in and start bringing up rehabs that offer this stuff. I mean, serious. The more he kept talking, I'm thinking, oh my gosh, wouldn't it be great to be able to start a facility that could start implementing what this gentleman has taught us today.
Yeah, absolutely.
Glenn, how would someone get a hold of you, or how can they find your books? And tell us, name off a few of your books. Heck, you got 14 of them.
Well, I think the ones that are the most relevant to our talk today is, am I holding this where you can see it? This is the one
absolutely.
that just came out in January, called the Adverse Childhood Experiences Recovery Workbook. And it has over 50 strategies that one can use either on your own or in combination with a therapist, should one decide to go the therapy route. But a lot of these skills, and I say in here that if trying to heal becomes overwhelming, that's a pretty good indication where you want to get a coach, a good trauma therapist to kind of hold your hand through it, because it can be really tough for some serious toxic stress. But a lot of these skills are useful just for everyday stress and also for healing the unresolved trauma memories that drive stress in the present. The other one, the self-esteem workbook, that came out, it was just revised and reprinted and republished, but that's been around for, about 20 years. And seems to be striking a chord for a lot of people. So I think if this one has skills for developing self-esteem when it wasn't there, or else you had it, but it was destroyed. And then this one goes deeper to the childhood roots of low self-esteem and shame. So together they make a pretty good
pair.
Okay.
Sorry?
Now,
I said a good pair.
Yeah.
how can somebody find those two books?
They're on Amazon. My website, one can read about them a little bit more. My website is www.resiliencefirst.com. Resilience First is one word, .com. And then you just reminded me, Al, my whole goal is to take stuff out of the clinic and put it in the hands of any parent, any teacher, any individual, because most of the stuff you don't need a Ph.D. in psychiatry to get pretty good at. I think there are times when you want someone who's really versed in trauma and healing, but a lot of times there's a lot that people can do on their own, self-managed. And so I want somebody to know what their options are and what they can probably safely do on their own, and when to say, okay, I need a resource person here. But it's not jet science. It's nothing to be ashamed about. It's just, I just look at it like these are skills that anyone can and hopefully will learn. And sometimes a traumatic experience is the incentive to learn skills. You go,
Yeah.
I thought I was pretty good at coping, and I guess I wasn't as good as I thought. So maybe I can learn something and not continue to suffer.
Absolutely. I love that.
That is really good. Is there anything else you'd like to share before we sign off, Glenn?
Just thanks for letting me talk about what I love, and thank you for what you both are doing.
Oh, well, thank you. I mean, I've really learned a lot here today, and it brought up some things that I had questions about myself. So, yeah, be looking forward to passing on your information to my family members and other people as well. So, thank you for that.
Yeah, and thank you for your time, Glenn. And gosh, I might as well just say here on air, thanks to Paul Feierheisen too for connecting us. Great connection. I'm really glad that he did, because when you and I first talked, I mean, we just spoke briefly, and then you actually called me and said, hey, what was it again that we were discussing? We both kind of had our notes scattered, I think. And then that second conversation, everything just connected. So yeah, it just worked out perfectly. So thank you so much for your time, taking time out of your evening. What you guys are 2 hours ahead. It's almost 4 here. So it's getting what, 6 o'clock there. But yeah.
What I really like too is all this kind of links to addictions and those kind of things as well. And so that really just want to remind people, because this is the other side of addiction. We're all trying to get on the other side of something. And so I'm glad that you're here to help with that as well. So,
Yep. Thank you.
Great. Thank you.
Glenn, thank you again. Everybody, thanks for joining us today on The Other Side of Addiction. As I say at the end of every podcast, this was a phenomenal show. This was another good one.
It's true.
It's because it is true. Yeah. Yeah. And again, if you guys have any questions for us, or if you need to reach out to Glenn or anybody else that we've had on our show, feel free to reach out to Lori and myself. My email is mralrichards@gmail.com.
and mine is LoriChevyGirl@AOL.com. And you can also find me on Facebook under Lori Warburton, and follow me there and instant message me, whatever you need.
Yeah, that's good. I always forget the
I'm always
social
there.
media.
First responder. So
Yeah, and I'm on social media as well. Thank you for bringing that up, Lori. I'm under Al Richards, or you can just go at Mr. Al Richards and it'll pull up, and on Instagram as well under Mr. Al Richards. And gosh, we're on Twitter. Gosh, we are everywhere, guys. So you should be able to get a hold of us. And I also want to say thank you to those who keep sending us phenomenal. I'm going to try not to get emotional here now, because the messages we are getting, that we are receiving, guys, thank you so much. That helps Lori and I know that the path that we are on, we're on the right path, that we are actually reaching people and we are helping people, because
making a difference.
the messages we are getting are just phenomenal. And I'm actually, the journal that Mallory gave me, I'm actually keeping track of a lot of these inside that.
Yeah,
inside
that's
that
good.
journal. So guys, thank you again. Thank you for all your support. Glenn, thank you for your time.
Thank you,
Love
Glenn.
everything that you're doing. Yeah. And we wish you the best. And guys, remember, addiction is giving up everything for one thing. Recovery is giving up one thing for everything.
And also, I like to say there's always light after darkness.
Amen. Thank you, guys.